Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper. Look at the articles, extract them for the relevance for your prelims as well as the mains examination. In the discussions that we will carry out, in certain areas, we shall be taking a larger view away from the topic as well to understand what kind of questions can be asked in the examination. Now, let us quickly take a look at the questions that or the topics that we are going to have a discussion for today. So, in total, we are going to have a discussion for 10 different topics, seven of them in slightly greater detail. So, starting with the multidisciplinary team of experts to define what constitutes the Aravalis. So, this is something which has appeared in page one. It is a developing story. So, here we shall be taking a look at the backdrop of this, why this was needed. This is relevant for your GS paper 1 as well as for your GS paper 3. Then, judicial removal, though a tough law with a loophole. So, what is the loophole when it comes to the removal of the judges? Now, that is something, or the judges of the High Court. Now, the removal of judges is something that has always been asked in the examination, in the prelims, as well as in the mains. Now, here, this article just mentions or talks about the case of what is the persistent loophole. So, we shall be examining once again for your revision purposes what is the process of removal in a point wise manner so that you can revise that as well or get an idea about it if you are not aware about it. So, this is relevant for your GS paper too. Now, building bridges, this is about RBI's proposal to have a central bank digital currency as a common platform across the BRICS nation. Now, this is relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, why AI infrastructure matters more. Now, this article talks about not the application of AI, not the language models that the AI develops, but the infrastructure associated with that. For example, the GPUs, the cooling devices, etc. So, that is where the infrastructure sovereignty, why it is important for a country like India. Very vital in news and very important for your GS paper 3. Chances are this year a question can be framed from this topic. China's latest military drills around Taiwan. What is the name of the military drill? We will take a look into it. And we will also try to understand the pattern associated and what are the challenges that confronts the global order. India mulls Gaza board invite. So, what is that Gaza board, which has been framed by none other than President Trump himself? And what are the challenges that confront India as it mulls whether to join it or not? So, this is relevant for your GS paper 2. This is also relevant for your GS paper 2. A Carney Doctrine has emerged on the sidelines of World Economic Forum summit, or meeting, which is being held in Davos, in Switzerland. So, what is this Carney Doctrine talking about? The concept of the middle powers, and that is where India's story in itself is something which has now been talked about in the form of Carney Doctrine. In other words, this is something that India has been following for a long period of time. So, this again becomes relevant for your perspective of IR in your GS paper too. Now, then, a couple of articles we will take a look in a brief manner for the prelims perspective. Now, before we jump into the first article, an announcement for all of you. Now, in order to improve your learning process and in order to ensure that those who attend the classes in the online medium they actually qualify, it is understood that it is discipline and rather the lack of it, which is one of the major lacunae that the candidates face. They get enrolled in an online class, but they are not able to attend them regularly. So that is why the Unacademy Platinum, which we have brought for you. Now, this is something which brings a newer form of online education in the sense that you will be available in the class with your cameras on. There will be accountability in the case that you miss certain sessions. You have super mentor sessions also with the case of those candidates and those people who have actually cleared the examination, so that all along the way you have a guidance available. And every month we shall also be guiding you personally with regard to study and what not to. So do attend the experience session of Platinum. The new batch is starting on 28th. Just click on the link in the description or the comment in the pin section and just take a look at what the experience session, which is free for all, looks like. Now, having said that, we move to the first article, that is the multidisciplinary team of experts to define Aravalis. Now, when we say Aravalis, now these are one of the residual fold mountains which are present in the western part of our country. Residual fold mountains. Now, these are clearly one of the oldest fold mountains across the country. And these are also, that is why, minerally very rich and endowed as well. If you take a look at the type of minerals that are found in the region of Aravalis, so they basically are enriched with minerals such as marbles, limestone, right? Limestone. Then you have granite. Then you have mica. Then copper, zinc, which is generally found. Zinc is generally found in the region of copper mines. Wherever you have older copper mines, you'll find some amount of zinc also, and in certain cases, some amount of gold extract also to be found, right? So these are some of the minerals that you find in the region of the Aravalis. Close to it, you have iron reserves as well. Now, these Aravalis, when they were created billions of years ago, they were quite lofty and quite high, amongst the tallest mountain peaks across the world. But over the years and over these billions and millions of years, the Aravalis have been eroded by wind, glacier, river, and so on. And now they have reduced in terms of its height to less than around 1500 meters, 1000 meters, and so on. That is why they are also referred to as the residual fold mountains. Another example of similar kind of mountain system is something that you find prominently in US. You have the Appalachians. Appalachians in US is also a similar residual fold mountain, even though not as old as the Aravalis themselves, but nonetheless they are also very rich in minerals and their height has also been reduced. Now, these Aravalis, they moderate the weather conditions when it comes to the central part of the country and even in the Gangetic plains of the country. Now, in these areas, for example, the dried winds from Rajasthan, the dusty sandstorms that originate from the Thar deserts, they are not allowed to enter into the Gangetic plains because of the barrier that we have in the form of Aravalis. Now, if let's suppose what happens, if let's suppose this dry, dusty sandstorm blows over to the land areas and the green field, then what happens? So, in that particular case, if an agricultural field, for example, has got large deposit of sand on it, the productivity and the yield per hectare substantially reduces. Over a period of time, the land also stands a risk of turning into a kind of a desert. So, desertification is another prospect that stares down those agricultural fields and agricultural areas. Now, these Aravalis, for decades now, have been subjected to huge amount of illegal mining. Now, when we say for decades, this is not something which has emerged today, yesterday, or a few years ago. This has been going on. And when we say illegal mining throughout the region of Haryana, as well as in region of Rajasthan, that is where you will observe slowly and steadily some of the hills have been removed. Now, FSI, Forest Survey of India, had given a definition for the Aravalis. The definition would be that you needed to have a slope angle or a gradient around 3 degree, and then the height parameters were given. Now, the Supreme Court basically put a complete blanket ban on mining activities in the Aravali Hills. And this was done long time back. But having said that, still the mining activities were carried on. Upon investigation, it was found out that the states themselves, that is Haryana, that is Rajasthan, even some parts of Gujarat, they differed in terms of what is the definition of hills. What can we remove or what should we leave behind? So that is where the Supreme Court actually formed a committee. And that committee submitted a report that, okay, this is what the definition of Aravali should be. Now, as per that committee's recommendation, I will show you what the committee's recommendation and submission was, which was accepted by the Supreme Court. Now, as per that submission, out of the 1200 or more such hill features, only thousands would qualify, around 1,000 to 1,500 would qualify to be subjected under Aravali Hills, and rest would lose their environmental protection. Now, that meant that for the rest of these 10,000 plus hill features, mining could be carried on. Now, that would create a gap in the Aravalis, which would impact the ecology and the ecosystem in a blaring way, or impacting the river recharge, impacting the green cover in the area, groundwater recharge, leading to water scarcity, and also what we started the discussion with, that is the scourge or the danger of desertification. Now, there was a lot of criticism which was leveled on the Supreme Court for accepting this definition of the Aravalis, due to which Supreme Court had put a stay order and no mining activities could be carried out. Now, the Supreme Court has basically come up with a further argument that we will form a multidisciplinary team of experts. The experts would be from different walks of life: environmentalists, foresters, scientists, and special experts when it comes to mining leases. Even the amicus curiae was consulted in this, and that is where they have been asked to submit a list of experts. Now, eventually, amongst these experts, a committee will be formed to define what forms Aravalis. Now, even that is going to be dangerous because something or the other will be eliminated. And that is where senior advocates, for example, Kapil Sibal, has argued that do not define what the hill features are, just protect the entire region. It is a subtectonic feature. That is what Kapil Sibal has argued, that it is a subtectonic feature which cannot be defined by legal measures. It will always leave behind a glaring loophole. Nonetheless, you need to be aware about what? What was the early definition of the Aravali? So in 2010, the FSI had said that the hills with a slope greater than 3 degree, foothill buffer of 100 meter, interhill distance or the valley distance of 500 meter would be considered to be Aravali Hills and Aravali Ranges. Now, the recent committee which has been set up by the Supreme Court and the definition which was accepted by the Supreme Court, as per the newer definition, any feature having an elevation greater than 100 meter or more from the local relief from the surrounding region would qualify under Aravali Hills. And two or more Aravali Hills located within the proximity of 500 meter from each other, that would constitute an Aravali range. Now, this is something which was problematic because as per this, out as I told you, out of 1,200 features, only 1,000 would be accepted. And if you take a look at the topographic image of the area, you will find very few hill features are the ones where the height is going to be greater than 100 meters. Majority of them, these are residual hill features. That means their height is reduced quite substantially. So many of them will easily be ignored. So that is why you have the issue. And what if all of this is exposed to the mining mafia? You will have issues when it comes to groundwater recharge, river flow, particularly in the case of River Luni, then River Banas and the Chambal River Basin, Chambal Basin, right? There, the flow and the amount of water which is available by the groundwater recharge, that will be impacted. Now, Aravalis, they also, because of the green cover, they offer a kind of a moist wall almost. So if you think about the Aravali features, now in these hilly features, you have the presence of some shrubs, some trees present in that area. Now, what it does, it provides certain moisture cover in the air in the vicinity. Now, this moisture cover, it acts as a protective wall and prevents the sandstorm from the Thar Desert to desertify the Gangetic Plains. And also, it accommodates vital biodiversity. So, that is why Aravalis are vital. Now, because it is a developing story, we have to take a look into what this new committee will be formed, when will it be formed, and what will be its actions. For more about the Aravalis, we have done a complete video about the Aravalis and the changing definition and its implications and the mining mafia. The link for that you'll find in the description below. Now, coming to the next article about the judicial removal, tough law with a loophole. Now, removal of judges. Now, that has been a kind of a prickly affair when it comes to judiciary for some time now. Because when we talk about the removal of judges, now you come across the term impeachment of judges, right? But impeachment as a term, is it used in the constitution? The answer is, for the judges, impeachment is not used. Impeachment as a term is used only in the case of Article 61 for the removal of or the impeachment of the president, not in the case of Article 124 or Article 217 for the removal of judges in the Supreme Court and the High Courts. So, here, let us quickly brush up our concepts about how a judge can be removed, what is the process, and while looking at the process, we will spot the loophole in that law and why it needs to be rectified. Now, but why are we discussing this all of a sudden? So, the reason being that in December 2025, a notice for impeachment of a judge of Madras High Court was submitted in the parliament, right? Now, removal of Justice G.R. Swaminathan, judge of the Madras High Court. Now, there were 13 charges leveled against the judge, which included that the judge has been acting against the secular constitutional principles and favoring lawyers of a particular community. Now, when we talk about how a judge can be removed or when a judge can be removed, there must be certain conditions, isn't it? Now, what are those conditions? So, first of all, the term impeachment or removal. So, for the removal of judges, the word impeachment has not been used in the Constitution. Which articles of the Constitution deal with the removal of the judges? So, basically, Supreme Court judges, the removal of them governed by Article 124, subsection 4 and subsection 5. For the removal of the High Court judges, however, you have Article 217 and 218 that we just discussed. Now, judges can be removed under what conditions? Because, mind you, the framers of the Constitution were very clear in this that the judiciary needs to be independent of the various different political pressures. How independent the judiciary actually has turned out to be is a matter of debate for another day. But that was the intention eventually, initially as well, that basically the judiciary has to be independent. So, just so that the judges do not succumb to very high amount of political pressure, in the case of a proven misbehavior or incapacity on the side of the judge, can you actually initiate the process for the removal of the judge? Now, is this proven misbehavior cited in the Constitution as well? So that is not cited in the Constitution, but Supreme Court through multiple judgments has cited what means by misbehavior. And it is not a closed list, by the way. So, misbehavior includes charges of corruption, lack of integrity, willful misconduct, moral turpitude, as well as the abuse of judicial office in any of the actions which have been discharged as an official. In that case, if corruption is there or any of these, then Supreme Court has said it will be tantamount to a proven misbehavior. Now, let's suppose in a particular case, a judge has been, or a judge, it has been clear, has carried out a proven misbehavior, a corruption case, or a kind of a moral turpitude. Now, then, what is the process to be followed? So, first of all, at least 100 Lok Sabha MPs or 50 Rajya Sabha MPs must sign a motion, removal motion, for the removal of that particular judge. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Now, 100 Lok Sabha MPs or 50 Rajya Sabha MPs, they will submit that motion to whom? To the chair of the house, isn't it? So it is submitted to the speaker in Lok Sabha or the chairman in the case of Rajya Sabha. Now, the speaker or the chairman's discretion is present, admit or disallow the motion. about it. Now, a speaker or the chairman, in the case of Rajya Sabha, has got that discretionary power whether to accept that motion for removal or not. Now, in this particular case, mind you, it is different as compared to the impeachment of the president. Article 61, which deals with the impeachment of the president, in that case, the chair has to, or the speaker has to accept it. But here, the speaker has got a discretionary power. Now, on what basis will the speaker accept that motion for removal, or on what basis will the speaker reject that? After all, the speaker doesn't have the power to inquiry. Only after the speaker or the chair accepts it will an inquiry committee be created. A three-member inquiry committee will be created. Now, that will only be the case after the speaker has accepted it. But on what basis can a speaker accept or reject it? That is where there is a loophole. That is where it goes silent. Now, if admitted, a three-member inquiry committee is constituted comprising of the Supreme Court judge, a Chief Justice of a High Court, and a distinguished jurist. Now, this committee will carry out a detailed investigation on the charges leveled against that particular said judge. And after that, it will arrive at a conclusion. Now, once the inquiry committee finds the judge to be guilty or not guilty, whatever, the motion to be supported by majority of the total membership of each house. And then at least two-thirds of the members to be present and voting. In that particular case only is the removal complete. And then it is submitted to the president, who then orders the removal. Right? Now, inquiry committee is formed. Then you have, after based upon the findings of the inquiry committee, the house will vote upon it. It makes sense. But the problem or the lacunae lies, why will the speaker accept or reject that motion for removal? Under what grounds? After all, the speaker has not carried out any inquiry. The basis for speaker's acceptance or removal is completely dependent maybe on media reports or on the policy of the government. So that is something which needs to be ironed out. And here, if the speaker or chairman disallows the motion for the threshold at the threshold, no inquiry takes place and the matter ends there. It is a different case that it can then be taken for a judicial review as well, but nonetheless, the matter ends. The Act does not specify clear criteria for the admissibility of the motion. Now, contrast this with the presidential impeachment. Under Article 61, the removal of the president, under that case, the presiding officer cannot refuse admission of a resolution once procedural requirements are met. However, Article 124.5 does not explicitly empower the speaker to, or basically empower the speaker to reject a motion, yet the Judges Inquiry Act 1968, which talks about the aspect of removal of the judge, that basically allows for this rejection of the motion. So it is not Article 124 itself, but the case of the legislation. Right. After all, the Constitution simply empowers the Parliament to frame the laws and the legislation for the remove. That is why you have the Judges case, the Judges Inquiry Act 1968, which drives the entire process. Right. So that is the case of the existent loophole. I hope that is understood. So here a simple question which is oftentimes repeated: what is the method for removal of a judge of Supreme Court? Now, in this case, how do you write the answer? In the intro, you talk about the case of which articles they basically drive this removal of the judge of the Supreme Court. So, Article 124, clause subclause 4 and 5. After that, you talk about the process, right? That you have 50 members, 100 members in Lok Sabha, 50 members in Rajya Sabha. They will submit the motion for removal. If it is accepted, then an inquiry committee will be created consisting of a judge of the Supreme Court, a Chief Justice of a High Court, and an eminent jurist. Then the inquiry will be carried out, the report will be submitted. Then the conditions of voting after that. So you mention that. Now, what you also do is this simple, if the question is simple and straightforward as this, you also have some scope to mention what is the discretionary power available and how it is different from the case of the impeachment of the president. If it is a 15 marker question, then definitely you have to mention that. If it is a 10 marker question, in brief, you can talk about. Okay. Now, then coming on to the next article, building bridges. Now, this article is based upon RBI's recommendation. Now, RBI has recommended to the government of India to allow for the central bank digital currency, right? And its own central bank digital currency to be a common medium of transaction amongst the BRICS nations. Now, mind you, India is going to hold and host the BRICS summit. So, whichever nation hosts summit meetings like BRICS, like G20, like Conference of Parties, in each of the cases, the prime effort of that host country is to bring about certain radical changes or certain momentous reform so that that host country is known for bringing or steering the ship forward. Now, this is a part of India's economic heft in a way, which started since India hosted the G20 summit itself. Now, when India hosted the G20 presidency and summit at that point of time itself, India talked about the integration of global digital medium of exchanges. Now, in this particular case, when we talk about the central bank digital currency, there are multiple aspects. There is the aspect associated with the digital currency, right? At the same time, now in the case of digital currency, RBI is always on board. But at the same time, the elephant in the room is cryptocurrency. That is where many of the central banks and RBI also is not in favor of private cryptocurrencies till now. This is what Donald Trump has been advocating, and this is what countries in our neighborhood, for example, Pakistan, they are already marching ahead in the case of regulation for the cryptocurrencies. But RBI, for a long period of time, has maintained its stance that it holds these cryptocurrencies to be slightly dangerous because they don't have a legal or a sovereign backing. Any particular fiat money or any particular currency, if it has got some backing, for example, when I give you the 10 rupee note, now 10 rupee note is worth that amount of reserve with the RBI. So that is where you have the exchequer getting a guarantee. Now, in the case of cryptocurrencies, you don't have that kind of sovereign backing. As a consequence of that, the cryptocurrencies can be quite fluctuating. And also, what you will come across is a scenario that because people expect the cryptocurrency values to increase over a period of time, so they start hoarding it like gold, right? So they start hoarding it. For example, you would hear about that the value of Bitcoin 10 years ago was this much, today it is this much. I have got this much amount or this 0.000 amount of Bitcoin, and that is worth this much. It will further increase. So cryptocurrency has got this other issue. RBI is staying clear of this. That is why the digital medium of currency that it is propagating, that can have multiple better impacts and multiple benefits. Ease of trade with sanctioned nations like Russia, for example. We have been struggling with the medium of transaction. Rupee and dollar trade clearly did not work. And that is where each of the countries, they also do not have the SWIFT window. So as a consequence, that transaction is impacting the overall trade volumes. Now, given the fact that in the present day geopolitical order, Donald Trump sees all the BRICS nations as a danger, as a risk, and threatens to impose sanctions and tariffs, we do need a reliable digital medium of transaction, which can also influence the business. So, in that case, it is positive. So, the Reserve Bank of India has recommended linking the CBDCs, central bank digital currencies of BRICS countries, be placed on the agenda for 2026 BRICS summit to be hosted by India. This builds on India's push during its G20 presidency for international cooperation and standardization in finance. However, there are multiple challenges. What are the challenges? Now, RBI's position with regards to CBDCs and cryptocurrency is something that we have just now. Now, RBI has consistently opposed private cryptocurrency, citing risk of volatility. What is risk of volatility? For example, today suddenly, all of a sudden, from the RBI's reserves, huge amount of cryptocurrency has been drawn. So in that case, you have the instability created in the case of the currency also, and in the long run, overall, many banks get also stressed. For example, yesterday, if you have been following the news as well, yesterday there was a kind of a bond run day before yesterday, which happened in Japan. Right. So that is where you basically have volatility with increased connectivity, which is an issue. At the same time, RBI has been supporting the digital currencies, for example, digital rupee, which can be transacted with the help of UPI as well. Now, limited domestic use and strong international case for transaction. In our country, digital rupee doesn't have that much of utility, right? But internationally, for transaction, it makes sense. Even for transparency in international transactions, as much transparency is there, better it is. So that will curb the rise of the secondary economy, or rather, the case of the black economy. So that is where money laundering practices can also be curbed with increased amount of transparency. Strategic advantages for sanctioned trade. As I told you, many of the BRICS nations, they are already facing the brunt of sanctions on the hand of no other but Donald Trump. So that is where the strategic advantage will be there for trading with other countries like Iran, like Russia. So in that case, Iran, Russia, and so on. Then geopolitical risk, that is also a challenge. Excuse me. The challenge is that already you basically have the case of the West and many of the far right politicians in Western Europe also seeing BRICS as an anti West platform. So chances are that it can turn the geopolitics to be much more hostile. Trump already every day finds new reason to impose new tariffs. Now, Trump had imposed 25% tariffs on India, 25% for trade with Russia, 25% for trade with Iran. So effectively, in certain cases, the trade could be as high as 75%, which is akin to saying a country that don't trade with us at all. So that is what the US market is offering to us right now. So we need a deal with the US. So that is why this can further increase the wrath of the most powerful nation in the world. So these are the challenges, and that is where there is some deliberation to look into. Now, here you can have a question, as is the case I can see, that why is it the case that BRICS countries don't have a common platform or a common currency for trade? See, every country does require their own currency to be a bit stronger or a bit weaker, depending upon the policy. For example, the Chinese policy has always been to devalue their currency, and they have always tried to devalue and keep the currency at a lower price. Why? So that the exports can be benefited. It is an export driven economy. Now, India is not an export driven economy. India is a consumption driven economy. 60% of the GDP is consumed, is amounted to consumption in the domestic market in many of the cases. So that is where you'll find India, which is a consumption driven and which is import dependent, particularly in the case of fossil fuels. We don't want our currency to be devalued to such an extent. China also imports fossil fuel, but it exports to such an extent that it makes sense for Chinese to devalue the currency furthermore. In our case, it makes national headlines that rupee has breached 90, rupee has breached 91, and there is a kind of a psychological slide which happens in the markets as well. So all the countries, they have differing agenda and differing perspectives when it comes to currency. So having a common currency in itself, that in a way interferes with the domestic economic agenda. That is why the countries, they generally don't go for a common third currency which can serve the purpose for all the grouping needs. Okay? Now, can't we trade in gold? Well, gold is a commodity which is much more difficult. Now, all the central banks are hoarding it. It is better to trade in digital currency than to trade ever in commodity. Okay? Now, then coming on to the next article, why AI infrastructure matters more. Now, this is based on the government of India's policy paper, which has been submitted on the same topic. Now, why AI infrastructure matters more? This is relevant for your GS paper 3, by the way. Now, before we talk about this article and I give you the pointers, understand what the article is about. Now, you all would have been hearing this for a long period of time that in this era of AI, this country is moving ahead in AI, China is moving ahead, US is moving ahead. Even in economy, you would have heard about it that those countries who have developed AI models, they are the ones who are benefiting out of the recent stock rally. The stock markets are doing well. In India, it is not doing so well because we don't have that great applicability of AI. That is where the article actually argues that everybody is focusing on the application of AI, rightfully so, that where AI will be applicable, what will be its impact. Nobody is actually focusing upon the infrastructure required for that AI to work. For example, for any LLM, right, large language model, any AI, uh, for example, you need a set of GPUs. You need the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure also, the servers, etc. Now, very small amount of that infrastructure is present in our country. So the article argues that in order to ensure and maintain that digital sovereignty going ahead into the future, in order to ensure that we are not dependent on a country like China or the US for the access to the data, we need to have concentration on AI infrastructure. And we need to plan about it. Because research papers have also indicated, recent article in Down to Earth also indicated about the fact that greater storage structures which are created or the physical infrastructure which is created for AI, research has indicated now it requires very high amount of cooling service. Obviously, you have high amount of processing which goes on every second, so the heating rate is very high. So the cooling needs to be very efficient. For that, many of the countries are simply pumping water as of now because they don't have alternatives. This already has the potential to cause water scarcity. Majority of the urban areas across the world are already suffering from water scarcity. Out of the 100 cities of the world, almost 70 plus cities are suffering from water scarcity. Now, in that particular case, if you now start building the AI infrastructure in an unplanned manner, it can exaggerate the problem that we are already facing the brunt of climate change with. So that is why the article talks about a planned policy framework for AI infrastructure so that going ahead into the future, this AI should be available to everyone. Right? For example, if tomorrow, let's suppose any of you want to develop a kind of an AI model. Now, for AI model to be trained, you require data. Now, where will you get that data? You will get that data from servers abroad. For that, either you can be denied that data on face value. China can deny you the data, or they can charge you very high amount of money for it, which a small startup will never be able to pay. So, as a consequence of that, you will have always a stymied growth of the AI sector in our country. This also means that we need to have a uniformity in terms of where the AI is being applied and applicable to. For example, in sectors such as healthcare, education, agriculture, that is where AI is lacking. Okay, so AI infrastructure has got two layers: the physical layer, data centers, the GPUs, high performance computing clusters, energy systems. This is where the cooling devices required are very high. And you also have the digital layer, that is the data sets, model repositories, governance frameworks, and access protocols. Right. So this article is arguing about creation of more physical layer as well. Now, AI overall, India generates nearly 20% of the global data. Still, it hosts only around 3% of the global data center. So the aspect of data sovereignty in itself is put at risk. Now, Government of India, as I told you, submitted a white paper on which the discussion is, that is democratizing access to AI infrastructure. Now, in this case, AI infrastructure should be treated as digital public utility available for everyone. This is where the government has actually created digital public infrastructure model, right, which has got open access sharing for everyone. Platforms such as AI Kosh, Bhashini, as well as TGDex, they have also done a substantial role when it comes to democratization of AI tools. Now, there are challenges, risk of global concentration. All the AI industries and major developments are happening in two regions, West, China. So all the AI data is somehow being concentrated only in these areas. As a consequence, accessibility can be an issue. Sustainability and energy constraints, as I told you, huge amount of power consumption, huge power consumption. At the same time, you also have the case of high water scarcity, highly water intensive, which can lead to drought conditions in the regions as well. Now, as a consequence, for this creation of these large infrastructures, you cannot have the small organizations being able to do it. That is where you basically need the case of public private partnerships to thrive. Those public private partnerships, they will bring in the expertise of the private sector, the infrastructural support from the public sector, the investment as well, and that will be able to create a few of the conglomerates in our country going ahead. And we also have to address uneven AI adoption in terms of industry. For example, industries like agriculture, healthcare, in all these, education, in all these, AI is substantially lacking behind. So that is where we have to work on this in order to improve our overall AI supremacy across the world. Okay. In certain areas, for example, China has actually implemented this to basically submerge a data center under deep water to provide natural cooling. But over the long run, how effective or how polluting it is in the environment also is something which has to be understood, because mind you, these data centers which are submerged under deep waters, they consistently will emit some amount of noise, and that noise can be very disturbing and disorienting for many of the marine species which move as a consequence of echolocation. So the environmental impact is something which is still not studied. Okay. Now, discuss the need for the development of AI infrastructure in India and the challenges which confront India in this sector. So, here, when we talk about the intro, you have to talk about both, that you have the physical infrastructure and the digital infrastructure. Now, it is talking about the development of AI infrastructure, means both of them. Right. So, that is what you talk about in the intro. You describe the digital and the physical infra. Then, in the body, to start with the issues with the physical infra. We don't have so much amount of physical infra. It is energy intensive, and it needs to be sustainable. It is concentrated in certain parts of the world itself. So all those problems you can highlight. Then come to the issues with the digital infra as well, that you don't have LLMs because of the lack of applicability across many multiple sectors, and so on. You can carry ahead. Okay. Now, what is behind China's latest military drills around Taiwan? Now, China has carried out a military drill around the region of Taiwan, and that has been named Justice Mission. justice mission. Now, as per this military drill 2025, as per this military drill, sorties, 130 plus sorties of aircrafts were carried out to the central point of the Taiwan Strait. And here, many of these sorties, around 80 plus of them, actually crossed the halfway mark of the water. China also carried out the live launch of the ammunitions or rocket force. And many of those rockets, they fell into the contiguous zone in the region of Taiwan. For those of you who are unaware, what is a contiguous zone? So if you consider the shoreline, 12 nautical miles from the shoreline, you basically have the territorial zone. And further 12 nautical miles, this is your contiguous zone. So this is where some rocket force has been carrying out the live drills. Now, China has been carrying out these massive exercises in certain cases. For example, in earlier instances, when you had the visit of a US dignitary in the region of Taiwan, China carried out these drills. Then again, you had the member of the Taiwanese government visiting US, you had these drills. What has actually sparked the recent drills or exercises? This is because of US's decision to provide $11 billion worth of arms to the region of Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is not that well protected. And mind you, after the template which has been set by US in the case of Venezuela, no one can argue that China doesn't have an argument for taking over Taiwan, provided it has got the power. The problem with Taiwan is that they are not good at developing the defense infrastructure at the pace which is required. And that is because of the party politics that you have. You have the case wherever defense spending is required. Now, the parties are pro independence, most of them. But whenever any bill associated with bolstering of defense is passed or is introduced, huge oppositions take place. Now, this region is becoming more volatile, with the new Japanese prime minister also stating about the fact that the incursion or takeover of of Taiwan by China will be seen by Japan as a risk for survivability, and that is where Japan can retaliate. Japan is also arming itself to the teeth. Now, it is only the case of Donald Trump and the so-called Donro Doctrine, as per which Taiwan is left to the hands and the whims of Xi Jinping. So that is where Taiwan is in a flux, but entirely in the region of South China Sea. It is again a developing story where now the drills have ended, but then what the drills carried out with the rockets landing close to the shore, that is a risk with the European leaders are flagging, but the Americans are pretty calm about. So that is basically the case about this particular news story. Now, India mulls Trump Gaza board invite as Israel UAE leaders join. Now, amongst the many things that US has been doing, US has basically initiated the forming of the Gaza board. It will basically be a transition and a transition form of governance and a government which will be initiated and led by technocrats. Now, for this, US has basically handed out invites to almost 60 countries, including Russia, including India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and so on. Now, all of them are invited to be a part of the Gaza board. And mind you, it is not that you are invited, you simply go there and attend a meeting. No, and you decide the future of Gaza. You already have Mr. Trump as a chair. People like Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio, then Jared Kushner, all of them are already in the higher positions of the board. You, as a country, will be a member and you are expected to provide $1 billion. Now, whether that $1 billion is for an ulterior motive or whether for the Gaza reconstruction, that has not still yet been clarified by the United States. So it is still a question in the doldrums. This is where India is actually thinking about whether it should join it or not. In all likelihood, India will join this in a very passive manner. Countries like Pakistan, Israel, etc., they have already joined it. Trump today basically declared that Russia has also joined it. Now, a couple of hours ago, Vladimir Putin issued a clarification that we have agreed to join it, but with a condition that the $1 billion term condition that you are providing, now, Russia won't provide $1 billion as of now. But the Russian assets that you have frozen since the time of Joe Biden because of the Ukraine war, from those Russian assets, you take $1 billion and do what you want. So, because it is very opaque, not transparent enough, and the objectives are not clear, that is why India basically is still walking the tightrope. Now, here, basically, what is the Gaza board and the Gaza peace? But that is something that you should be aware about. Forget the politics behind it. So, this body will focus on issues such as governance, capacity building, regional relations, reconstruction, investment attraction, large scale funding, and also the case of capital mobilization. The members would include Mr. Trump as the chair, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, then Steve Witkoff, Trump's real estate buddy, golf buddy, and also negotiator in chief, Jared Kushner, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, then Mark Rowan, World Bank President Ajay Banga, Robert Gabriel. All of these will be a part of the Gaza board. The Bulgarian diplomat Nikolai Mladenov, now he has been appointed as the High Representative for the Board of Peace. Now, this board will be leading the transition from the Hamas governance to the Palestinian administration of technocrats known as NCAG or NCAG, National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. Now, it will be headed by Ali Saad, right? So, it will be basically transitioning from the Hamas governance to the case of a Palestinian Authority governance, that is NCAG. Okay. Now, those who have agreed, Middle Eastern countries, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Morocco, Pakistan, Indonesia, Kosovo, Uzbekistan, all of them have accepted it. In all likelihood, in a couple of days' time, you might also hear about India accepting it because it is better to be a part of the high table when it comes to decision making in terms of Gaza. Now, it is not that substantial outcomes will be generated, but better to be a part of the table rather than excluded out of it. And from that, being a part of the table, we come to the next article, that is a Carney Doctrine for third way in global politics. Now, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been making global headlines for the past couple of days due to his speech and thanks to his speech at the platform of World Economic Forum in Davos. Now, Mark Carney basically had, amongst the many things he said, one of the things that he said was the fact that if you are not on the table, you are on the menu. That means if you are not amongst the people who decide, decisions will be taken at your behest and on your expense. And this is where he also said the role of middle powers. Middle powers mean who are not very low in terms of the income index and who are not the superpowers. Presently in the world, we are close to around a G2 scenario, the two countries, US and China. Now, that is where Mark Carney has argued that look, when you go to a great superpower in order to have a deal, you feel that you are sovereign, but you are just playing subordinate, and your sovereignty also being played on. So, that is where Mark Carney had talked about the case of the middle powers coming together. He said that in the present day world of geopolitical turmoil, the countries have two options, either to be very protective, build the walls higher, is what he said, be very protective around the regulations, or open up the opportunities and possibilities for interrelation and cooperation amongst the countries. And that is where he argues that the middle powers they have a lot to gain with cooperation, mind you. After a long period of time, a Canadian prime minister had a visit to Beijing and basically marked a strategic agreement. European leaders are also slated to visit Beijing in the coming days. And this basically signs a shift in the global order. Now, when it comes to India's perspective, India has always been a firm believer of the fact. In fact, the article argues that some of the recent criticisms that India has been getting is on the basis of the fact that India has not so much integrated itself to the Western way of economy and the Western sphere of the world. India has not truly come into the US camp. That was, and the Western camp, that was the true criticism and the thorough criticism, excuse me, that India has been receiving since the Russia Ukraine war. Now, in present day world order, if you take a look at US policies, now in that particular case, India stands to be vindicated a bit because all the countries who were siding with the US, those are the countries which are being imposed a tariff upon. Ukraine is being left to Russia in a way, and that is where the world is changing. That is where Carney has said that world is not in a phase of transition, it is in a phase of rupture. It is breaking. And that is why the middle powers need to come together. So this aspect of not getting subjugated by the superpowers and the middle powers actually coming together to collaborate and cooperate amongst each other, that is being termed as the Carney Doctrine, and it is being in global media platforms like Bloomberg, etc. It is being compared with the Donroe Doctrine. So, which is better, Donroe or the Carney Doctrine? And to argue, this has been a doctrine that is being followed by India for a long period of time. Okay? Now, then coming to certain articles relevant for your prelims perspective. Now, Mozambican right activist to get Indira Gandhi Peace Prize. So you have Michel. Gracha Michel will receive the Indira Gandhi Peace Prize, which includes a citation, 1 crore cash prize, and a trophy. Now, the decision is taken by international jury, chaired by former National Security Advisor, that is Shiv Shankar Menon. Shiv Shankar Menon has taken that, or is the chair of that deciding authority. Okay. Now, this is basically where African states women and human rights advocate. Uh, she has worked tirelessly when it comes to the case of uplifting the women's rights. So that is relevant for your prelims. Who has got the Indira Gandhi Peace Prize? Okay. Then study shows India's deltas are sinking due to human activity. Now, in this case, this is something which has appeared in the science section of the newspaper today. Now, it talks about the case that multiple satellite data has indicated that various different deltaic regions of the country, from Kabini River, even Kabini has been talked about, which is a tributary of River Kaveri. Then you have the case of Ganga Brahmaputra, Ganga. Then in the case of even Mahanadi, right? Godavari. In all these deltaic stretches, over a period of time, due to human activities, there has been some amount of sinking which has been observed in the land areas. Now, as a consequence of that, now, when we say human activities, what do we mean by that? Construction activities, which will further increase the amount of load in these soft, marshy areas. As a consequence of that, the land is getting compressed. Now, because of that deltaic sink, what will be the outcomes of this? That is something that you have to be aware about. So the outcome will be, first of all, greater risk of floods, greater risk of floods. Then, other than that, you will also be confronting the case of increased seawater ingression. Because, mind you, in the coastal area or deltaic stretches which are in the coastal area, you will find that storm surges due to cyclones, etc., keep on occurring. And you have the seawater rise as well. So you have the seawater aggression, which basically even makes the groundwater quite salty, right? And makes the agricultural areas unfit for cultivation in the future because the soil turns out to be quite saline. So, as a consequence of that, in a long run, the people of the region can face issues of water scarcity. Okay. So, for your prelims, you should be aware about the deltaic sink, why it is happening, majorly due to human activities. Can it happen naturally, by the way? The answer is yes. It does happen naturally also, but in a very slow process. How naturally? So, what do the rivers do? They will deposit the sediments one on top of each other. The sediments will be deposited. Over a period of time, the sediments will compress each other, right? The overlying layer will exert pressure on the lower layers. So the lower layers, as they compress, as they basically thin out, so automatically there is something happens naturally, and then there is the isostatic rebalancing also which happens. But now it is driven by the case of the mechanical process and the kind of anthropogenic process. Now, Cabinet okays 5,000 crore equity infusion in SIDBI. Now, SIDBI, basically the Small Industries Development Bank of India. Now, this SIDBI has been quite instrumental in terms of providing some amount of credit to the various MSMEs. And also, these MSMEs, they are high risk sectors, by the way. So, the when we talk about the CRAR, right, capital to risk weighted asset ratio, CRAR, right? So, in this case, when you have a high risk asset where you are lending money, in that particular case, you need sufficient amount of capital backing as well, right? So that you keep on lending furthermore. With each of the MSMEs being able to create huge amount of jobs overall, as of September 30, 2025, 6.9 crores MSMEs registered with the government, they employed or provided employment to 30.16 crore population. So it is a huge employment popul- uh, employment benefit program as well, in a way, if you think about it. All these MSMEs, they provide employment to large number of population. So the more number of MSMEs, the better that they get, the larger that they get, is better for the employment and overall the demand in the economy. So for this purpose, the government has planned to infuse 5,000 crores in various different tranches. It will be three tranches of the total amount. 3,000 crore will be infused in 2025, 2026, right? And 1,000 crore each in 26, 27, and in 27, 28. So this 5,000 crore, 2025 to 20. Okay. That brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope that you have found the discussion to be valuable and meaningful and has added some content to your existing information set. If you have liked this analysis, put that in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.